I thought I'd grown used to the verbal jabs after dinner, but in the dairy aisle, he grabbed my wrist in front of the entire supermarket. The sound of the plastic tray hitting the tile floor was sharp and hollow, and I thought, good. This is evidence. What my stepfather didn't realize, the woman standing right behind me in the checkout line wasn't just another shopper. She was the one person he never wanted to meet. My name is Nora Whitfield, and I've spent the last decade making sure healthcare companies follow the rules. At 34, I work as a compliance and risk specialist at Orchard Ridge Medical Network, a private healthcare system that spans 3 counties. My job is simple. I track documentation, verify procedures, and ensure everything leaves a proper paper trail. I believe in evidence because the truth always leaves traces. My mother remarried 2 years ago. Raymond Pike, Ray, as he insists everyone call him, swept into her life with his practiced charm and executive presence. He's the COO of Granite Basin Markets, a regional grocery chain with 17 locations, the kind of man who wears French cuffs to barbecues and name-drops his way through conversations. Mom glowed at their wedding, and I tried to be happy for her. I really did. But something felt off from the beginning. Ray had this way of steering every conversation back to money. Who had it? Who needed it? Who owed it? He'd casually mention Mom's retirement accounts over dessert, ask about her mortgage terms during Sunday brunch. When I visited, he'd make these little comments about my obsession with paperwork, calling me paranoid for keeping receipts and scanning documents. "You treat everything like it's evidence for a trial," he'd say, that condescending smile playing at his lips. "Occupational hazard," I'd reply, matching his smile with my own. The first real flag came 6 months ago. Mom mentioned, almost offhandedly, that Ray had been helping with her finances. When I pressed for details, she waved me off, but I noticed she'd started asking his permission for purchases. Her own money, her own house, but suddenly she needed his approval for a new washing machine. Then came the power of attorney documents. Mom showed them to me one afternoon. Proud of how Ray was taking care of everything, the language was deliberately vague, granting him broad authority over her financial decisions. When I pointed out the risks, she got defensive. "He's my husband. Nora, this is what married people do." "Married people don't usually need blanket power of attorney, Mom. You wouldn't understand. You've never trusted anyone enough to share your life." That stung, but I let it go. Divorce teaches you to pick your battles, and I'd already lost one family. I wasn't ready to lose another. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. At work, I'd seen enough fraud cases to recognize the patterns, the gradual isolation, the financial enmeshment, the way Ray always positioned himself between Mom and anyone who might ask questions. So I did what I do best. I started documenting. I pulled public records on Granite Basin Markets. The company looked healthy on paper, but the vendor contracts raised questions. Multiple suppliers sharing the same tax ID numbers, pricing structures that didn't match industry standards, payment schedules that routed through shell companies before reaching actual suppliers. When I tried to bring this up with Mom, Ray was always there, steering the conversation away. He'd laugh about my conspiracy theories and change the subject to my trust issues from the divorce. Mom would nod along, caught between loyalty to her daughter and faith in her new husband. Last week, everything escalated. Ray had drawn up papers for Mom to refinance the house she'd owned free and clear for 15 years. He wanted to pull out equity for investment opportunities he wouldn't specify. When I objected, he turned cold. "Your mother and I are building a future together. Nora, something you clearly can't understand. I understand debt, I understand risk assessment, and I understand that Mom doesn't need to leverage her home for your business ventures." His face flushed, but his voice stayed level. "You need to stop interfering in our marriage." "I'm not interfering. I'm protecting my mother's interests." "Her interests are my interests now." The way he said it, possessive, final, made my skin crawl. This wasn't about love or partnership. This was about control. That night, I called Aunt Jo, my mother's sister. She'd been watching from the sidelines. worried but unsure how to help. We agreed to meet for coffee, away from Ray's sphere of influence. I needed an ally, someone who could reach Mom when I couldn't. "He's isolating her," Joe said, stirring her coffee with sharp, angry movements. "Last month, he told her I was a bad influence because I questioned his investment advice." "What kind of investment advice?" "Something about vendor contracts and supply chain optimization. It sounded like gibberish to me, but he made it seem like we were too stupid to understand his brilliant business mind." I pulled out my phone and showed her some of the public records I'd found. Joe's face went pale. "This is fraud, isn't it?" "I can't prove it yet, but the patterns are there." "What do we do?" I thought about all the cases I'd worked, all the documentation that had saved people from financial ruin. "We build a case, quietly, carefully, and we make sure Mom has an exit strategy when she's ready to see the truth." That was the plan. Anyway, before Ray decided to escalate things in aisle 7 of his own grocery store, before he put his hands on me in front of witnesses and cameras, before he met the one person who could destroy everything he'd built. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how a man like Ray operates, and why I knew that paper trails and procedures would be his downfall. In my world, violence is messy and unpredictable, but documentation is forever. The threatening started subtly, the way everything with Ray did. He'd call my office, voice smooth as aged whiskey, asking if I'd reconsidered my position on Mom's refinancing. When I held firm, his tone would shift, still polite, but with an edge that made my assistant uncomfortable. "Your mother's financial security is important to me. Nora, I'd hate to see anything jeopardize that." "Are you threatening to cut off support to my mother?" "I'm simply pointing out that partnerships require trust from all parties." After that call, I started recording everything. Minnesota is a one-party consent state, and I'd learned from my divorce that documentation beats memory every time. I also began building what I called my insurance file, a comprehensive package of data that painted a very different picture of Granite Basin markets than the one Ray presented to the world. The UCC filings were fascinating. Granite Basin had liens against inventory that didn't match their reported stock levels. Vendor contracts showed a pattern of systematic overcharging, with kickbacks flowing through a web of LLCs. The most damning evidence came from comparing invoices to actual market prices. Ray's approved vendors were charging 30 to 40% above standard rates, with the excess disappearing into consulting fees and service charges. I reached out to Maddie Sloan, who managed the Granite Basin store on University Avenue. We'd met at a healthcare conference years ago, before she'd moved into retail management. She was sharp, observant, and most importantly, she reported directly to the CFO, not Ray. "Something's not right with our purchasing," she told me over coffee, glancing around the cafe nervously. "Last month, Ray pushed through a new vendor for produce. Their prices are insane, but he shut down anyone who questioned it." "Do you have access to the invoices?" "I can get them, but Nora, if he finds out..." "He won't. I know how to protect sources." Maddie became my eyes inside Granite Basin. She fed me information carefully. Nothing that could be traced back to her directly. Purchase orders with suspicious markups. Emails where Ray strong-armed store managers into accepting overpriced inventory. Vendor payments that took curious detours through companies registered in Delaware and Nevada. Meanwhile, Ray escalated his campaign against me. He told Mom I was jealous of their happiness, that my bitterness from the divorce was poisoning my judgment. He suggested I needed therapy, maybe medication. Mom started repeating his words, asking if I was okay, if I was working through my issues. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm just worried about you." Ray says that's what controlling people always say. The irony wasn't lost on me. Aunt Jo proved invaluable during this time. She kept Mom's trust while quietly documenting changes in her behavior, the way Mom now deferred to Ray on everything, how she'd stopped making decisions without his input, the new joint accounts that gave Ray full access to Mom's retirement savings. "She showed me the signature cards yesterday," Jo told me. "Her handwriting looked Off. Off how? Shaky, like someone was guiding her hand. I added potential forgery to my list of concerns. The vendor investigation revealed the full scope of Ray's scheme. He'd created a network of shell companies that sold products to Granite Basin at inflated prices. The excess money flowed back to accounts controlled by Ray and his associates. Classic kickback structure, but executed with enough complexity to fool a casual audit. I mapped out the entire network on my dining room wall, photos of documents connected by red string, like something out of a crime procedural. Each thread represented a financial connection, each pushpin a shell company or suspicious transaction. The pattern was beautiful in its corruption, elegant, almost artistic in its deception. Ray must have sensed I was getting close. His calls became more frequent, more aggressive. He'd drop hints about Mom's health, her need for stability, how stress could affect someone her age. He never made explicit threats, but the implication was clear. Back off, or Mom would suffer. "You're playing a dangerous game, Nora," he said during one particularly tense call. "I'm not playing anything. I'm protecting my family." "Your family? Last I checked, you lived alone in that sterile apartment, surrounded by your files and your paranoia. Better than living a lie surrounded by fraud and intimidation." He hung up on me. That night, I compiled everything into a preliminary report. 23 pages of documentation showing systematic fraud, vendor kickbacks, and potential embezzlement. I encrypted it, uploaded it to multiple secure servers, and created a dead man's switch. If anything happened to me, the report would automatically send to law enforcement, media outlets, and Granite Basin's board of directors. Paranoid? Maybe. But I'd learned that paranoia is just pattern recognition with high stakes. The invitation to meet Ray at the Granite Basin store came through Mom. She called, voice carefully neutral, saying Ray wanted to clear the air and thought meeting at his workplace would be professional. I knew it was a trap of some kind, but I also knew that confronting him in public, surrounded by cameras and witnesses, was safer than meeting anywhere private. I prepared carefully, copied all my documentation to a flash drive for Aunt Jo, sent encrypted files to my attorney, made sure my phone was fully charged with recording apps ready. I even wore my most professional outfit, gray suit, minimal jewelry, nothing he could grab easily. The grocery store meeting would change everything, but walking through those automatic doors that afternoon, all I knew was that I had evidence. He had ego, and somewhere between the produce section and the checkout lanes, one of us was going to blink. I should have known it would end with violence. Men like Ray always resort to force when their paper empires start to crumble. What I didn't know was that his biggest mistake wouldn't be the assault itself. It would be who was standing behind me when he did it. The Granite Basin on University Avenue smelled like floor wax and rotisserie chicken. I arrived at 3:47 p.m., choosing peak shopping hours deliberately. Ray had suggested meeting in his office, but I insisted on the sales floor. Public spaces meant witnesses. Witnesses meant safety. I found him in aisle 7, between the organic milk and the Greek yogurt. He stood with his back to the dairy cases, arms crossed, wearing his usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the company logo. Store manager stance, designed to intimidate. I kept my phone recording in my jacket pocket. "Nora," he didn't smile. "Thank you for coming. You wanted to talk about Mom's finances. I'm here. I want you to stop poisoning her against me." "I'm not poisoning anyone. I'm asking questions about irregular vendor contracts and suspicious refinancing proposals." His jaw tightened. "You know nothing about my business." "I know enough. Triangle Logistics, Ridgeview Provisioning, Cascade Supply Solutions. Should I continue?" Each shell company name hit like a slap. His face flushed deep red, and I saw his hands curl into fists. Around us, shoppers pushed carts past the yogurt displays, oblivious to the tension. "You've been talking to people at my company." Not a question. Public records are public. Ray, UCC filings, state corporation databases, county recorder documents. It's all there for anyone who knows how to look. "You need to stop." His voice dropped low, threatening. Your mother is happy. I make her happy. Why can't you accept that? Because happiness built on fraud is temporary. When this comes crashing down, and it will, she'll lose everything. The only thing crashing down will be your relationship with your mother. He stepped closer, using his height advantage. I'll make sure of that. I held my ground. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Stay out of my business, or what? I pulled out my phone, letting him see I was recording. You'll steal more from her? Forge more signatures? Run more money through shell companies? That's when he snapped. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with crushing force. My phone clattered to the floor. Sliding under the dairy case, he yanked me forward, and my shoulder slammed into the refrigerator door. The plastic tray I'd been pretending to examine flew from my other hand, hitting the tile with a sharp crack that echoed through the aisle. You stupid! He caught himself, glancing around. A woman with 2 kids had frozen by the cheese display, staring. I didn't struggle, didn't scream. I let him grip my wrist, let the security cameras capture every second. Physical evidence, witnessed assault, exactly what I needed. Ray, the voice came from behind me, calm and professional. I think you should let her go. He released me immediately, stepping back with practiced casualness. I turned to see a woman in her 50s, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed government employee. She stood with the controlled stillness of someone accustomed to volatile situations. This is a private conversation, Ray said, his executive voice sliding back into place. Not anymore. She bent down, picked up my phone, and handed it to me. The screen was cracked but still recording. Are you all right? I cradled my wrist, already feeling the bruises forming. I'm fine. Ray straightened his polo shirt. My stepdaughter and I were having a disagreement. Family matter. I see. The woman pulled out a business card. Allison Kerr, Financial Crimes Division, Attorney General's Office. Interesting place for a family discussion. Mr. Pike? The color drained from Ray's face. I watched him cycle through calculations. Denial, charm, retreat. He settled on righteous indignation. I don't appreciate the implication. I'm a respected business owner. I'm aware of who you are. Kerr's tone suggested that wasn't a compliment. I'm also aware that assault is a crime, regardless of family relationships. Maddie appeared at the end of the aisle, drawn by the commotion. Her eyes widened as she took in the scene. Ray's aggressive stance, my defensive position, the government official standing between us. Is there a problem here? Maddie asked carefully. No problem, Ray said quickly. Nora was just leaving. Actually, I said, I think I need to fill out an incident report. For the assault. That's not necessary, Ray started. It is, Kerr interrupted. Ma'am, I witnessed Mr. Pike grab you forcefully. The store's security footage will corroborate that. I suggest we preserve that evidence immediately. Maddie nodded. I'll call security to save the footage. Nora, do you need medical attention? I flexed my wrist, wincing at the sharp pain. Probably should get it looked at, for documentation. You're overreacting, Ray said, but his voice had lost its authority. Kerr stepped closer to me, lowering her voice. I've been looking into some interesting vendor relationships at Granite Basin. Your name came up in our preliminary research as someone who might have relevant information. My heart raced. She pressed her business card into my hand. Call me, soon, and yes, definitely get that wrist examined. Document everything. Ray's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went even paler. I have to go. Board emergency. He strode away without another word, leaving me standing in the dairy aisle with a throbbing wrist and a business card that might change everything. Maddie walked me to the manager's office to fill out the incident report. As I wrote, she pulled up the security footage on her computer. The angle was perfect. Ray grabbing me, yanking me forward, the phone falling, all of it crystal clear in high definition. I'll make sure multiple copies are saved, Maddie said quietly. Corporate policy is to keep incident footage for 30 days, but I'll archive it separately. Thank you. Nora, Be careful. Ray has connections everywhere. I thought about Allison Kerr's card in my pocket. So do I. At the urgent care clinic, Dr. Martinez documented my injuries with clinical precision: soft tissue damage, bruising consistent with forceful grabbing, possible minor ligament strain. She took photographs from multiple angles and wrote a detailed report. Domestic situations can escalate quickly, she said gently. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? It's not like that. He's my stepfather, and I don't live with them. Abuse is abuse, regardless of living arrangements. Here's a resource sheet, just in case. I took the paper, another piece of documentation for my growing file. That night, I called Allison Kerr. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Whitfield, I was hoping you'd call. How's the wrist? Sprained. Documented. Ms. Kerr, you mentioned vendor relationships. Not over the phone. Can you meet tomorrow? Federal Building, 10th floor. Bring whatever documentation you've compiled. I have a feeling we're looking at the same patterns from different angles. I'll be there. Good. And Nora? That was smart. Meeting him in public? Men like Ray Pike always reveal themselves when they think they're untouchable. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by my wall of evidence: red strings connecting shell companies, photographs of forged documents, USB drives full of financial data. Tomorrow, I'd hand it all over to someone with the power to do something about it. Ray thought he'd scared me in that dairy aisle. Instead, he'd introduced me to exactly the right person at exactly the right time. Sometimes the universe provides its own kind of justice. I just had to be smart enough to recognize it. The Federal Building's 10th floor smelled like burnt coffee and justice. Allison Kerr's office was exactly what I'd expected. Neat stacks of files, a whiteboard covered in connecting lines that looked eerily similar to my dining room wall, and a coffee mug that read, "Follow the money." "Show me what you have," she said without preamble. I opened my laptop and walked her through 18 months of investigation. Shell companies layered like Russian dolls, invoices that told different stories depending on which set of books you examined, vendor contracts that would make a forensic accountant weep. Kerr took notes on a legal pad, occasionally asking for clarification. When I showed her the pattern of kickbacks flowing through Ridgeview provisioning, she actually smiled. "We've been tracking Ridgeview for 6 months," she said. "Could never connect it definitively to Granite Basin. This is the missing piece." "There's more." I pulled up the comparison spreadsheets. Every vendor Ray personally approved shows the same pattern: market price plus 30 to 40%, with the excess flowing to consulting fees. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $3 million over 2 years. She whistled low. That's federal territory, wire fraud. If any of this crossed state lines. It did. Several vendors are incorporated in Delaware. Even better, she leaned back, studying me. You know, filing a whistleblower complaint makes you a target. He already assaulted me in his own store. I think that ship has sailed. Fair point. She slid a stack of forms across the desk. Formal complaint, both public and sealed versions. The sealed version protects certain investigative details while the case builds. You'll also need to file with the SEC if Granite Basin has any public debt. They're about to issue bonds for expansion. Her eyes sharpened. Timeline? End of Q3. Ray's been printing up the books for months. Then we need to move fast. She pulled out her phone. Margaret, can you join us? Yes. The Granite Basin matter. Bring the preservation letters. While we waited, I filled out the whistleblower forms. My hand only shook a little as I signed my name, committing to a path that would either save my mother or destroy my family, maybe both. Margaret turned out to be an IT specialist who spoke in acronyms and lived for data preservation. She prepared legal hold notices for Granite Basin's email servers, accounting systems, and vendor databases. These go out simultaneously, she explained. Once served, they can't delete anything without facing obstruction charges. When? I asked. That depends on your timeline. We can move immediately or build more. He's getting suspicious, I interrupted. And violent. The sooner the better. Kerr nodded. Monday morning, then, gives us the weekend to coordinate with the banking regulators. I spent the rest of the day providing detailed statements, authenticating documents, and identifying key players in Ray's network. By the time I left, my whistleblower complaint had teeth, sharp ones. Ray's counterattack came faster than expected. That evening, Mom called, hysterical. How could you? She sobbed. Ray showed me the papers. You're trying to destroy him. Mom, what papers? The ones saying you're mentally unstable, the therapy records, the medication history. What therapy records? I haven't been to therapy since the divorce. He has documents. Nora, official-looking ones. He says you've been fabricating evidence because you're having paranoid delusions. My blood ran cold. Mom, listen to me. Any documents he has are forged, just like some of the signatures on your financial papers. Silence. Then, quietly, how did you know about the signatures? Because I've seen your real signature for 34 years. The ones on the refinancing papers don't match. Ray said I was just tired when I signed them. Mom, when have you ever been too tired to sign your name properly? More silence. I could hear her breathing, processing. He's been getting calls all evening, she finally said. Pacing the house, yelling at people. He told me you'd gone crazy, that you were trying to ruin our happiness. I'm trying to protect you, both of us. I need to think. She hung up. I immediately called Aunt Jo. He's starting his discreditation campaign. Can you? Already on my way to her house, Jo said. I'll stay the night. Say I'm having car trouble or something. The weekend was a blur of preparation. I backed up everything to multiple locations, created detailed indexes of evidence, and wrote a comprehensive timeline of Ray's fraud. I also filed for a restraining order, attaching the security footage, medical records, and witness statements. Sunday night, Kerr called. Preservation letters go out at 9 a.m. Are you ready for the blowback? As ready as I'll ever be. Good. One more thing. We've been in touch with Granite Basin's primary lender. They're very interested in your documentation about covenant violations. Monday morning came like a thunderclap. I watched from my apartment as my phone exploded with calls and texts. Ray, trying alternately to threaten and bargain. Mom, confused and frightened. Extended family. Getting Ray's version of events. I ignored them all, following Kerr's advice to let the legal process unfold. At 9:17 a.m., Maddie texted, Security just locked down the accounting department. Federal agents are here. At 9:42 a.m., Aunt Jo called. Ray just got served with something at the house. He went ballistic. Your mom is shaking. At 10:15 a.m., my attorney confirmed. Restraining order granted. He can't come within 500 feet of you. At 11:30 a.m., Kerr emailed. Granite Basin's board called an emergency meeting. Banking consortium is demanding immediate audit. Nice work. The mythology of revenge always involves grand gestures, dramatic confrontations, violence meeting violence, but real revenge, I was learning, came in the form of preservation letters and audit demands. It came from understanding systems and using them correctly. It came from letting men like Ray hang themselves with their own rope, woven from forged documents and fraudulent invoices. By noon, Ray's carefully constructed empire was starting to crack. He'd spent years building it, brick by corrupt brick. It would take the government months to fully dismantle it, but the foundation was already crumbling. I sat in my sterile apartment, surrounded by my files and my paranoia, and smiled. Ray had been right about one thing. I did treat everything like evidence for a trial. Because sometimes, that's exactly what it becomes. The financial forensics team found Ridgeview Provisioning's real owner within 72 hours. Mitchell Graves, Granite Basin's assistant CFO, had been smart enough to use his wife's maiden name on the incorporation documents, but not smart enough to use a different address. The FBI served warrants at dawn, seizing computers, files, and one very nervous accountant. Kerr called me that afternoon. Graves is singing like a canary. Apparently, Your stepfather promised him a CFO position at the next acquisition if he played ball. Will he testify? He's begging to testify, looking at 15 years for wire fraud versus 2 years with cooperation. Easy math. I was reviewing vendor contracts when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I recognized the voice immediately. Granite Basin's lead bank representative. Ms. Whitfield? This is David Sterling from First National. I understand you filed some concerning reports about our client. That's correct. We'd like to review your documentation regarding covenant violations. Can you meet with our audit team tomorrow? I'll bring everything. The banks moved faster than the government. They had skin in the game. Hundreds of millions in credit lines backed by supposedly healthy inventory and receivables. My spreadsheets showing systematic invoice inflation made their risk assessments worthless. I spent the evening preparing what I called the Banker's Special, a presentation focused entirely on financial exposure. No criminal allegations, just cold numbers showing how Ray's scheme put their money at risk. Mom called around 9. Her voice sounded stronger than it had in days. Joe showed me the signatures, she said without preamble. The ones on the refinancing papers. You were right. They're not mine. I'm sorry, Mom. Are you, or are you glad to be proven right? I thought about lying, giving her the comfort of believing I took no satisfaction in exposing Ray, but she deserved honesty. Both, I admitted. I'm sorry he did this to you, but I'm glad we caught it before you lost the house. He's been on the phone all day with lawyers. Says you're destroying an innocent man. Innocent men don't forge signatures or assault people in grocery stores. He says that was a misunderstanding. There's video, Mom, crystal clear video of him grabbing me hard enough to leave bruises. Silence stretched between us. Finally, she said, I need you to know something. I'm not leaving him because of the money stuff. I'm leaving because when I told him I was scared, he said fear was just another word for stupidity. When did he say that? Right after the federal agents left. I was crying, and he looked at me with such contempt, like I was worthless for being frightened. You're not worthless, Mom. I'm starting to remember that. The bank meeting took place in a glass tower downtown. 5 auditors, 3 lawyers, and 2 risk management specialists sat across from me at a conference table that probably cost more than my car. I walked them through everything methodically. The shell company network, the invoice padding, the inventory that existed on paper but not in warehouses. By the time I finished, several faces had gone pale. How long has this been going on? Sterling asked. At least 2 years, based on the documentation I've reviewed. And the total exposure? Conservatively, Granite Basin's actual inventory is worth 60% of what's claimed on their financial statements. The rest is inflated invoices and phantom stock. One of the lawyers leaned forward. Can you prove that? I pulled out Maddie's latest reports. 3 store managers have been documenting discrepancies for months. Physical counts versus system records. The gaps are significant and growing. The room erupted in controlled panic. Phones appeared, calls were made, and suddenly I was alone with Sterling. We're freezing their credit lines immediately, he said. The bond offering is dead. You've just saved us from a catastrophic loss. What about the company? Without credit? They'll be in bankruptcy within a month. He studied me. You know this will destroy your stepfather. He destroyed himself. I just documented it. That evening, Aunt Jo called with an update. Mom had moved in with her temporarily, taking only personal items and important documents. Ray had apparently spent the day alternating between rage and desperation, calling every contact he had to try to stop the bleeding. He actually called me, Jo said, offered to pay for Mom's care if I could convince you to retract your statements. Her care? He's pivoting to the concerned husband angle. Says the stress of your actions has made her mentally fragile. Of course he is. Don't worry. I recorded the call. He offered me $50,000 to support his version of events. Pretty sure that's witness tampering. I added it to the list of charges piling up against Ray. The man who'd thought he was untouchable was learning that gravity applies to everyone. especially those who build their castles on foundations of fraud. Wednesday brought more good news. The forensic accountants found Ray's personal stash, bank accounts in Nevada containing diverted funds. Nearly $2 million that should have been in Granite Basin's coffers sat in accounts controlled by Ray and his inner circle. It's textbook embezzlement, Kerr told me. He wasn't just defrauding vendors, he was stealing from his own company. What's the timeline now? Arrests within the week. The evidence is overwhelming, thanks to you. That night, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. Sitting in my apartment, staring at the wall where my evidence map used to be. I thought about Ray's empire crumbling, Mom's marriage ending, a company heading for bankruptcy. But then I remembered his hand on my wrist, the contempt in his voice when he called Mom stupid, the forged signatures that would have stolen her home. Some men build their success on the backs of others, crushing anyone who threatens their climb. Ray was learning what happened when someone pushed back with spreadsheets instead of fists, with documentation instead of violence. In his world of corporate manipulation, he'd forgotten that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one who fights you. It's the one who simply tells the truth about what you've done. The bankers had a saying, "Figures don't lie, but liars figure." Ray had been figuring for years, massaging numbers and manipulating data to create his illusion of success. But I had the real figures, and they were about to destroy him. The restraining order hearing was set for 9 a.m. Tuesday. The bond offering roadshow started Wednesday. Ray's lawyers had fought for a delay, arguing the timing was prejudicial, but Judge Martinez wasn't buying it. "Your client's business schedule doesn't supersede assault allegations," she said firmly. I arrived early, wearing the same gray suit from the grocery store incident. My lawyer, Patricia Reeves, had coached me extensively. "Stick to facts. Don't elaborate. Let the evidence speak." Ray entered with 2 attorneys, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled fury. He kept glancing at his phone until the judge ordered all devices surrendered. "Ms. Whitfield," Patricia began, "please describe what happened at Granite Basin Markets on the afternoon in question." I testified calmly, describing the meeting, the escalation, the physical assault. When Patricia introduced the security footage, the courtroom watched Ray grab my wrist, yank me forward, saw my phone skitter across the floor. "The video speaks for itself," Patricia said. Ray's lawyer tried to minimize it. A momentary lapse in judgment during a heated family discussion. "Objection," Patricia said. "Assault isn't a family discussion technique." Then came the surprise witness. Allison Kerr took the stand, identifying herself as a state investigator who'd witnessed the incident. "Mr. Pike grabbed Ms. Whitfield forcefully enough that I felt compelled to intervene," she testified. His demeanor was aggressive and threatening. Ray's face flushed deep red. His lawyers hadn't expected Kerr. Judge Martinez didn't deliberate long. "The evidence clearly shows Mr. Pike committed assault. The restraining order is granted. Mr. Pike, you are to stay 500 feet away from Ms. Whitfield at all times." "Your Honor," Ray's lawyer protested, "they work in related industries. This could impact—" "Then Mr. Pike should have considered that before assaulting Ms. Whitfield in his place of business." As we left the courthouse, Patricia pulled me aside. His lawyers asked about a settlement, drop the criminal charges, retract the whistleblower complaint, sign an NDA. They're offering $2 million. "No." I told them you'd say that. Just wanted you to know they're desperate. That afternoon, Granite Basin's board held an emergency session. Maddie texted me updates from inside the building. 2:47 p.m. Auditors presenting now. Board members look sick. 3:15 p.m. Just showed the Nevada accounts. CFO walked out. 3:42 p.m. They're discussing emergency leadership changes. 4:23 p.m. Ray just stormed out. Security is following him. The bond roadshow was scheduled to begin in 18 hours. Investment banks had already printed materials, reserved conference rooms, scheduled meetings with institutional investors. Granite Basin needed that money to survive. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. David Sterling from First National. The banking consortium is calling the existing loans, he said. Covenant violations, material misrepresentation, fraudulent financial statements. Take your pick. What does that mean for the company? Without the bond offering? Chapter 11. By Friday, maybe Thursday. I thought about the employees, the honest ones like Maddie who'd just been doing their jobs. What about the workers? Bankruptcy doesn't mean closure. The stores have value. Someone will buy them. Probably keep most employees. It's management that should worry. That evening, Kerr called with more news. Graves gave us everything: emails, recorded conversations, even a spreadsheet showing who got what from the kickback scheme. Is Ray's name on it? All over it. He wasn't just participating, he designed the entire system. When do you move? Tomorrow afternoon. We want him at the office, not home, cleaner that way. I spent the night unable to sleep, thinking about timing. The board meeting at 2 p.m., the arrest shortly after, Ray walking into that boardroom thinking he could still salvage his empire, not knowing the FBI was already in the building. Wednesday morning brought controlled chaos. The financial press had gotten wind of Granite Basin's troubles. Grocery chain faces liquidity crisis, ran across Bloomberg. Bond offering in doubt, headlined the Wall Street Journal. I went to work as usual, trying to focus on my regular compliance duties, but my phone buzzed constantly with updates. Mom called at lunch. Ray left the house at dawn, took 3 suitcases and his passport. Did he say where he was going? The office said he had to save the company. She paused. Nora, I found more documents. Transfers from my retirement accounts I never authorized. How much? 400,000 over the last year. I closed my eyes. Send me copies. That's federal theft from a retirement account. It carries serious prison time. Prison. She said it quietly, like she was tasting the word. My husband is going to prison. He was never really your husband, Mom. He was a predator who saw an opportunity. I'm starting to understand that. At 1:45 p.m., Maddie texted, Ray just arrived. He looks terrible. Board members gathering in the main conference room. At 2:00 p.m., meeting started. Ray presenting recovery plan. At 2:27 p.m., someone just handed Ray a note. He went white. At 2:31 p.m., FBI agents in the lobby, multiple units. At 2:35 p.m., they're in the elevator. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I sat at my desk, refreshing news sites, waiting for word. At 2:42 p.m., Kerr called. We have him. Fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, theft from a retirement account. He's looking at 20 years minimum. How did he react? Tried to run, made it to the stairwell before agents caught him. Not his most dignified moment. And the board? Voted to terminate him for cause 30 seconds before we arrived. They're cooperating fully. The news broke within an hour. Local stations ran footage of Ray being led out in handcuffs. His perfect executive image finally shattered. The financial press connected it to the canceled bond offering, the imminent bankruptcy. But I wasn't watching the news. I was sitting with Mom and Aunt Jo, showing them how to check credit reports, how to freeze accounts, how to protect what Ray hadn't already stolen. We ordered Chinese food and spent the evening reclaiming her financial life, one document at a time. I'm sorry, Mom said suddenly, for not believing you, for choosing him over my own daughter. You didn't choose him over me. He manipulated you. That's what predators do. Still, I should have trusted you. I squeezed her hand. You trust me now. That's what matters. As we sorted through papers, I thought about the morning in the dairy aisle, how Ray's hand on my wrist had started a chain reaction that ended with handcuffs on his. Sometimes the universe provides its own poetry. The Granite Basin market sign glowed in the distance, visible from Joe's kitchen window. By tomorrow, bankruptcy trustees would be swarming the corporate office. By next week, liquidation sales would begin. Ray had built an empire on lies and intimidation. It had taken me 18 months to map it, 6 days to destroy it, and 1 moment of violence to set the destruction in motion. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more arrests, more fallout. But tonight, sitting with my family, eating lo mein and rebuilding trust, I finally understood what victory looked like. It looked like paperwork properly filed, like criminals in custody, like my mother's signature, her real signature, on documents protecting her future. It looked like justice, served cold and precisely documented. The granite basin boardroom hadn't been renovated since the 90s. Wood paneling, leather chairs, and a massive table polished to mirror brightness. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see the distribution center. Trucks lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. I sat in the gallery with Kerr, watching Ray's final performance. He stood at the head of the table, clicker in hand, presenting his strategic recovery initiative to 12 board members who already knew he was finished. They just hadn't told him yet. The bond offering remains viable, Ray insisted, clicking through slides showing projections based on fraudulent numbers. These temporary setbacks. Temporary? Board Chairman William Chen interrupted. The FBI served preservation letters. Our banks are calling loans. The Attorney General is investigating. How is any of that temporary? Ray's jaw tightened. If certain disgruntled parties hadn't made baseless accusations. Baseless? Chen pulled out a folder. Mitchell Graves signed a cooperation agreement yesterday. He's provided emails. Ray, emails where you explicitly outline the kickback structure. The clicker trembled in Ray's hand, around the table. Board members avoided his eyes. These were people who'd golfed with him, attended his charity galas, praised his leadership. Now they studied their portfolios like scripture. I've built this company's value by 40%, Ray said, voice rising. You're going to destroy everything over some accounting discrepancies? Fraud, said Linda Morrison, head of the audit committee. Not discrepancies. Fraud. The forensic team found $2 million in diverted funds. Your personal accounts. Ray set down the clicker carefully, too carefully. I want my lawyer. He's in the lobby, Chen said. We asked him to wait outside. This is a board meeting, not a criminal proceeding, though that's about to change. That's when the note arrived. A secretary slipped in, handed Chen a folded paper. He read it, passed it to Morrison, who passed it to the next member. I watched it travel the table like a fuse burning toward dynamite. Ray, Chen said finally, I move to terminate your employment for cause, effective immediately. You can't. All in favor? 12 hands rose in unison, not one hesitation. Ray's face flushed purple. You ungrateful. I made you all rich. Stock options, bonuses, dividends. Built on fraud, Morrison said, which makes us potentially liable. Our D&O insurance won't cover criminal acts. I'll sue every one of you. With what money? Chen asked mildly. Your assets will be frozen by end of day. That's when Ray snapped. Not physically. He'd learned that lesson in the dairy aisle, but verbally. He let loose years of contempt for the people he'd manipulated. You think you're clean? He snarled. Morrison, you signed off on every vendor contract. Patel, you pushed the expansion knowing we couldn't afford it. Chen, you... We relied on fraudulent information you provided. Chen cut him off. The difference is we were deceived. You were the deceiver. Ray grabbed his laptop, started to storm out, then stopped. Through the glass door, he could see them, FBI agents in Navy windbreakers, waiting in the hallway. No, he whispered. Kerr stood up beside me. Excuse me, that's my cue. She walked out to meet her team. I stayed, watching Ray realize his empire was collapsing in real time. The board members gathered their papers, avoiding his gaze. Morrison actually turned her chair away. Ray tried one last play. The company needs me. Without my relationships, the vendors will... Your vendors are shell companies, Chen said. We'll be happy to lose those relationships. The door opened. Kerr entered with 4 agents. Raymond Pike, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and theft from an employee retirement account. This is a mistake, Ray said, but his voice had gone hollow. As they read his rights, I thought about symmetry. He'd grabbed my wrist in public, thinking witnesses made him safe from consequences. Now he was being arrested in front of witnesses who'd ensure consequences stuck. "Hands behind your back, please," an agent said. Ray complied, all executive authority draining away. The handcuffs clicked with beautiful finality. As they led him past the gallery, our eyes met. He mouthed something, probably a threat, maybe a curse. I didn't care. I'd won with spreadsheets and documentation, the weapons he'd thought beneath notice. Kerr paused on her way out. The retirement account theft was the cherry on top. Your mom's $400,000? That's a federal crime with a 10-year minimum. He's done. The boardroom emptied except for Chen, who sat staring at the presentation still frozen on screen. Ray's fantasy numbers promising growth that would never come. "Ms. Whitfield?" He'd noticed me in the gallery. "I owe you an apology, and probably a thank you." "I don't need either. Just take care of the employees who weren't involved." "We'll do our best, though bankruptcy limits options." He studied me. "You could have taken the settlement, $2 million to stay quiet. Some things matter more than money." Spoken like someone who's never run a public company, but he smiled sadly. "You did the right thing. We should have caught this ourselves." I left him there, surrounded by the wreckage of Ray's ambitions. In the parking lot, news vans were already gathering. Tomorrow's headlines would be brutal. Stock would crater. Suppliers would panic. Employees would update resumes. But in the dairy aisle of the University Avenue store, a new security camera recorded normal shoppers buying normal groceries. No executives grabbing wrists. No violence hidden behind corporate polish. Just people shopping in peace, the way it should be. My phone buzzed. "Mom." I saw the news. They showed him in handcuffs. "How do you feel?" "Free. For the first time in 2 years, I feel free." "Good. That's how you should feel." "Nora, thank you. For not giving up. For fighting when I couldn't." "That's what family does, Mom." I drove home through streets lined with granite basin markets, each one a monument to Ray's greed. By next month, they'd have new owners, new management, maybe new names. The empire Ray built on lies would be parceled out to honest businesses. But tonight, they were crime scenes wrapped in corporate logos, evidence of what happens when someone thinks they're too powerful to face consequences. The restraining order in my glove compartment was just paper. The real protection came from Ray's new address: federal custody, no bail, awaiting trial for crimes that carried decades. Sometimes revenge comes from violence meeting violence. Sometimes it comes from patience and planning and the willingness to tell uncomfortable truths. And sometimes it comes from standing in a grocery store, letting a violent man reveal himself, and trusting that the right person is watching. Allison Kerr had been behind me in line that day by pure chance, but I'd built the case that let her act on what she saw. Together, we destroyed Ray Pike more thoroughly than any physical confrontation could have. He'd thought grabbing my wrist showed power. Instead, it showed weakness, the last desperate act of a man who'd run out of subtle weapons. Now he'd have 20 years to think about that moment, 20 years to remember how his empire fell because he couldn't keep his hands to himself in the dairy aisle. I called Maddie as I pulled into my building. "How's everyone handling it?" Shocked, but not surprised, if that makes sense. We all knew something was wrong, just not how wrong. "Any word on the stores?" "Buyers are already circling. We'll probably have new owners by month's end." "Good. You deserve better leadership." "Nora, that woman who was behind you that day, that wasn't random, was it?" I smiled. "Complete coincidence. Sometimes the universe provides hell of a coincidence. The best kind." I hung up and headed inside. Tomorrow would bring more work. Testimony, depositions, probably civil suits. But tonight, I'd won. Not with violence or threats or intimidation, with documentation and truth and the beautiful binding power of federal law. Ray Pike had thought he was untouchable. He'd touched the wrong person. The University Avenue Granite Basin looked different 6 weeks later. New signs reading Fresh Valley Markets hung where Ray's Empire logo used to reign. I pushed my cart through the automatic doors, breathing in the familiar scent of produce and floor wax. Maddie waved from the customer service desk. She'd been promoted to regional manager under the new ownership, finally recognized for the competence Ray had exploited. "Aisle 7?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Weekly shopping," I said. "Nothing dramatic." But I did head to the dairy section, partly from habit, partly from something deeper. The tiles had been replaced during renovation. New owners wanted no trace of the old regime. Even the security cameras had been upgraded, their silent eyes recording everything in crystal clarity. I reached for a gallon of milk, and my wrist twinged. The physical pain had faded weeks ago, but phantom sensations lingered. Some bruises go deeper than skin. "Excuse me?" I turned to find a woman reaching for yogurt. Not Allison Kerr. She was busy preparing for Ray's trial. Just another shopper navigating the dairy aisle in peace. "No problem," I said, stepping aside. At checkout lane 4, the same one where everything had started, I placed my items on the belt. Bandages, though I didn't need them anymore. Milk, because some routines shouldn't be broken by bad memories. And a manila envelope containing the final documentation for Mom's restored accounts. The cashier scanned each item with practiced efficiency. No drama, no confrontation, just the ordinary rhythm of commerce, the way it should be. I paid and collected my receipt. Always get receipts, always leave trails, and headed for the exit. Through the windows, I could see the parking lot where news vans had clustered 6 weeks ago. Now it held only shoppers' cars and a few pigeons fighting over crumbs. My phone buzzed. "Mom." "The house is officially back in my name alone," she said. "Joe and I are celebrating with wine." "Good wine?" "The kind that doesn't come from companies involved in federal investigations." We laughed, and it felt clean, free of the weight we'd carried for 2 years. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for leaving, for starting over. I'm proud of you, too, for fighting when everyone said to let it go." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the store. Ray's trial would start in 3 months. Graves had agreed to testify, along with 2 other executives who'd flipped for reduced sentences. The U.S. attorney promised me Ray would serve at least 15 years, maybe 20 with the retirement account theft. 15 years. He'd be past 70 when he got out, his business reputation destroyed, his assets seized for restitution. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic, it's thorough. I thought about the settlement offer, $2 million to stay quiet, to let Ray keep stealing, to pretend that afternoon in aisle 7 never happened. Some people would have taken it, called it pragmatic, even smart. But I'd learned something from my divorce, from years of watching powerful men manipulate systems. Silence is complicity with a price tag, and some things, safety, justice, truth, shouldn't be for sale. My phone rang. Patricia Reeves, my attorney. "The civil suits are moving forward," she said. "Ray's personal assets won't cover all the vendor losses, but you'll get your legal fees back, plus damages for the assault. Give my share to the Employee Relief Fund." "All of it?" "All of it. I didn't do this for money." "What did you do it for?" I watched a mother with 2 kids exit the store, bags balanced expertly as she herded them toward a minivan. Safe, unharassed, free to shop without fear of workplace violence. Because someone had to. After Patricia hung up, I drove home through streets where granite basin signs were coming down one by one. Fresh Valley, Sunshine Grocery, Community Foods, new names for old locations, honest businesses replacing corrupt ones. At a red light, I glanced at my wrist. The bruises were gone, but I'd never forget the weight of his grip. The moment when Ray Pike revealed exactly who he was. A man who thought power meant the right to grab, to take, to hurt. He'd learned otherwise. Back in my apartment, I stood before my dining room wall. The evidence map was gone, donated to the FBI for their training program on financial fraud detection. In its place hung a single frame, the court judgment granting the restraining order, signed and sealed. Some people keep diplomas on their walls. Some display family photos or art. I kept proof that the system could work when you fed it the right evidence. My laptop chimed. An email from Kerr. Thought you'd want to know. We just arrested the CFO of another regional chain. Same pattern as Granite Basin. Your case created a template we're using across the state. You didn't just stop Ray. You stopped the next Ray, too. I smiled, closing the laptop. Tomorrow I'd return to my regular job. Reviewing healthcare compliance, ensuring patient data stayed protected. Ordinary work that would never make headlines. But tonight, I poured a glass of wine. Good wine, not associated with any criminal enterprises, and toasted the empty wall where my evidence used to hang. To documentation, to patience, to the woman who happened to stand behind me in line at exactly the right moment. To justice served at checkout lane 4, with a receipt for proof. Ray Pike had thought he was building an empire. Instead, he'd built a case study in how financial fraud unravels when someone refuses to stay silent. His mistake wasn't just the assault in aisle 7. It was assuming that a woman who spent her days ensuring compliance would somehow fail to document his crimes. But mostly, his mistake was putting his hands on me in the first place. Some lessons are learned in boardrooms or courthouses. Ray learned his in a federal processing center, wearing orange instead of French cuffs, trading his executive suite for a cell. I raised my glass once more, this time to everyone who'd ever been grabbed, threatened, or silenced by someone who thought power made them untouchable. We are not victims, we are evidence collectors. And sometimes, that's the most dangerous thing to be. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel and sharing your thoughts below. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to hear what you think.